That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Marketing Truths, a three-part pulse check series brought to you by Enrollify and Element 451. I'm Ryan Morbido, Senior Advisor at 5 Degrees Branding. There's an echo chamber in higher ed marketing, a lot of the same people and a lot of the same ideas. It's time to bring in some new voices and new perspectives. Join me as we talk with for-profit CMOs who have extensive experience in developing strong competitive brands. They'll share their knowledge and expertise, and we'll talk how it translates to higher ed marketing. Now join me for today's episode. Well, hello. My name is Ryan Morbido. I'm a senior advisor with 5 Degree Branding, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking today with Seth Matlins from Forbes. I pride myself on not chasing things, and I feel like this is the most I've chased someone since my future wife in college. So I know you're really busy, and I'm absolutely thrilled and excited for you to join me here today.
I'm really happy to join you. Thanks for being persistent.
Seth, tell our listening audience your role at Forbes and maybe some of the highlights of how you got there.
I'm the managing director of our CMO network. What that is always and perpetually, especially for an organization that champions entrepreneurial capitalism, a work in progress. But fundamentally, I think of it as kind of playing a role in both the coalescence of community and the representation of community, and that community is chief marketing officers specifically, but the marketing community, global marketing community broadly, as I think that I have a bias that marketing both is and certainly should be a fundamental growth engine, strategic and growth engine for enterprise, but that too often, because it isn't well understood, its impact is mitigated. And I think that's bad company by company and bad for global GDP at scale. I got here because I was friends with Forbes' chief content officer for years. And I was leaving a job when they had reconsidered who and how they wanted to run the CMO network at Forbes. And rather than hiring another journalist, another reporter, which is how it had been done historically, they, I think very wisely wanted to hire a practitioner, somebody who was from the community, of the community, who understood the challenges. And I've spent a career on the client side and agency side, going back and forth. So for better or worse, I do understand them. And regardless of the fact that it was me, I think it was a pretty inspired decision and point of view by two folks, our current chief content officer and our former chief revenue officer, is now the CEO at Time, to do it that way.
Yeah. When I think about your accomplished marketing career, I know you led a global marketing team at Live Nation, over 500 marketers. Are there characteristics, Seth, knowing that people come from all different backgrounds and different expertise, but what are those common things you see in the most successful CMOs?
Well, I think number one, and I think this is, one of those self-inflicted wounds. Not every, and it's, by the way, it should be absolutely every, and it is not every, CMO sees themselves as a commercial leader. And that's that framing, that context, that orientation to moving the business forward every day and on a sustainable and profitable path is fundamental. When I was hired at CAA, Creative Artists Agency, where I went, suddenly it's almost exactly 25 years ago, after I finalized my deal, and I did my deal with the general counsel there, a legendary guy. I said to him, so what's it take to be successful here? Which was, by the way, probably something I should have asked before I finalized my deal. But I'll never forget, he said to me, you got to have a high tolerance for ambiguity. And I think I've never hired anybody who I didn't think had that sense. And I think that it really, defines what today's chief marketer has to have, because there is a real absence of certainty, even though there's no absence of expectation of certainty. There's a wildly ambiguous world. And I think, as trite as it might be to say, I think you got to be brave, bold, and willing to take big swings, cognizant that they're not all going to work out. They may even be disasters. but that if you learn from them, they're not failures.
Absolutely love that. And is there anything that kind of signals for you maybe an appetite for ambiguity, knowing that so much of our world is gray and not as maybe black and white as we or our colleagues would want it to be?
Well, I think it gets into the soft arts um, pretty quickly, but I do think it is, what we call inside Forbes, the entrepreneurial CMO, or the CMO who takes an entrepreneurial approach to marketing, and it's some of those things I mentioned, which is creative instincts, willingness to embrace and perhaps even encourage failure, and in service of moving beyond the incremental to the innovative and exponential. It's finding the balance in every given moment, in any given moment, between the art and the science of marketing.
Love that. When you think about measurement of marketing, a lot of our colleges and universities struggle. Obviously, the enrolling more students and raising more dollars are at the top of the list. But what would you suggest, Seth, in terms of other things that our CMOs should really be thinking about, of maybe indicators of future success?
Well, I'm certainly no expert in the marketing of academic institutions, though I will say that what is the same regardless of what you're marketing, to whom you're marketing, and when you're marketing, is you got to make a value case, right? And you got to be of value and valuable, and you have to be more valuable than the next person. And I think, value has components, right? Value to whom, value for whom, value from what, and value delivered by what. And if you don't understand, because as much as has changed about the practice of marketing, the fundamental role, the intention of it is unchanged. It is, to quote Peter Drucker, it's to create a customer. It's to capture attentions and influence attitudes and behaviors so that you're driving growth. You can have different growth metrics, so that you're driving growth on a profitable and sustainable basis. But I probably wouldn't deign to give too much advice to people whose jobs I don't understand, as much as I don't understand the college marketer's job.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think that there's a lot that is transferable when we think about the marketing principles and the value of developing new customers, and then certainly the growth driver that you mentioned. Seth, we are an industry of non-early adopters, probably really late adopters. Talk to our listeners about where you see AI today, this level of automation kind of revolutionizing our marketing landscape. How would you share some thoughts around that?
Well, probably anything I say today will be somewhat out of date tomorrow. And while that might be slightly hyperbolic, it's not wildly hyperbolic. I think that adoption and deployment of AI, and I think it's important. Well, AI has been around for a long time. Most of the time when we talk about this, we're talking about generative AI and that which kind of hit the cultural consciousness at the end of, 22 with OpenAI and ChatGPT. That requires that tolerance for ambiguity, and it requires a lot of experimentation. Personally, if you can do it, I would immediately defer to and engage experts in it. Experts kind of both in the technology itself and the deployment within your sphere of influence, within your category, if you will. But there's no question that GAI can be a great partner to, resource for, collaborator with today's marketer. And I think that if I had any watch out, and it is again one of balance, and this is something I talk a bit about, much of our conversation about GAI in particular is about efficiency. And we should never lose sight of effectiveness in our efficiency conversations, right? Because no matter how little something cost, if it didn't work, it wasn't very efficient. I think the other thing that we all have to consider, and this is emerging over the last few months, and I think is still relatively nascent, is a consideration not just about how AI changes what we do as marketers, but arguably far more importantly, how it changes what we do as humans. And in our quote unquote consumer consumptive role, it changes everything from search and discovery to how we are going to be bots marketing to bots, agents marketing to agents moving forward. So I think it's, explore aggressively, experiment aggressively, and deploy intentionally.
I love that. What's one piece of advice you would give, Seth, for someone who's maybe aspiring to become a CMO, maybe not has a formal background in marketing? What would you lift up in terms of advice to them?
Well, I don't have a formal background in marketing. I just started doing it. Now, I did grow up in Manhattan, the son of two marketers. So, dinner table conversation was marketing. So I kind of got my MBA over chicken. But I think the most important thing to remember is marketing is a business strategy. That's all it is, right? Marketing objectives are business strategies. And if you do not speak the language of business, if you do not understand the P&L and how the P&L is constructed, you're less likely to be of value to that business. Concurrently, or additionally, rather, I am a very brand-driven marketer. I think brand is the greatest engine for differentiation, margin, growth. It's the greatest influencer, if we were to borrow a word from the influencer economy in the history of, and the greatest performance engine in the history of performance engines. And so it is about knowing how to deploy always more resources that are always more limited than our opportunities, which requires a real strategic orientation, right? As the legendary former CEO of PepsiCo, Andrew Newey, said, strategy is the art of sacrifice. And if you're not willing to sacrifice things with a vision for what will yield more actionable returns, however you define that, then I'd probably look for another job.
Awesome. I love listening to you, Seth. Is there a book, a podcast, or a resource that's had a major impact on your career, knowing you've seen a lot and then helped a lot of marketers, emerge in that CMO role? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I haven't helped them emerge in that CMO role. They're doing that on their own. Look, my career is really long. And so it's hard for me to single out anything kind of over the course of a career. But I'll share, a book that I talk a lot about these days is Morgan Housel's book. It's called Same as Ever. And it talks about what doesn't change as much as what does. And I do think, marketers like the human beings they are can, be distracted by all that is changing. I certainly think that I would read the J. Walter Thompson, the JWT Guide to Planning. You can find it online. It's a PDF. And from a podcast perspective, I learn a lot by recording my own, which is the CEO's Guide to Marketing, because I get to sit with some of the best marketers, chief marketers in the world, and understand how they look at the world, how they look at driving their businesses forward, and what lessons they have for all of us. So I'm not much of a doer anymore, but I'm a big listener.
Yeah. And what would be maybe one insight? And I know you're connected to CMOs, global leaders. What would be one kind of theme that you see from the most successful CMOs that you talk with?
I think it's, what I said before, which is understanding that theirs is a commercially driven job. The best ones understand that. The best ones, and I just released an episode recently with Antonio Lucio, who's an absolute legend in the marketing business, is currently Chief Marketing and Public Affairs Officer at HP. And I quote Antonio all the time. He said something to me a few years ago, which is today's CMO needs to be the CEO of the function, right? You cannot have expertise across the breadth and depth. There's just, you can't even have knowledge across the breadth and depth of it. So you've got to be able to hire right, deploy right, make decisions with imperfect information. And I think, if we keep those things in mind, we've got a better chance than we would otherwise.
Yeah, I think, Seth, to a certain extent, my marketing leaders were kind of paralyzed. We're not willing to take some of those risks. And you and I know the only way we know what works is to go and test it. And for me, it's...
I would push on that. You don't know what works just because you tested it. If we knew it worked because we tested it, New Coke would be on the shelves and Hillary would have been president. Testing is imperfect. And, one of the things I'm always curious about is if we get a bad medical diagnosis, we go for a second opinion. If we get a good one, we're like, oh, cool, I'll just take one. Testing is imperfect. So don't think because you tested it, you have any truer path to certain outcome than if you didn't. I mean, by the way, you should test it anyway, because there are always insights in there. But I think my bias is that if you're not willing to take chances, you're pretty fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. What excites you most about the future of marketing, and where do you see maybe, Seth, in the next 5 or 10 years, this industry going?
Well, I'm not much for, playing Nostradamus, but what excites me most is for marketing to regain a seat at the table, the board table that I think it has historically had and has always deserved. And I say that about the category. Not every marketer deserves that seat at the table, right? And I know I'm being a bit repetitive, so forgive me for that. But if you don't understand that your job is, as I said before, to drive the business forward, to be a commercial leader, to act in the best interest of the business first, with your expertise in marketing second, then you don't deserve a seat at the table. But I think more and more CMOs are coming to understand that, more and more marketers for that matter, are coming to understand we've created false binaries and have gotten a bit enamored with the prefixes of marketing, digital marketing, social marketing, performance marketing, blah, 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 blah. I've forgotten it's all just marketing. And you got to make a decision about what lever to pull to get what you want, or to have the best chance of getting what you want.
What's in terms of your career, looking back, and I know you've accomplished so much, what would you have done different, Seth, if anything?
I would have gotten more of a business education, formally and in the beginning. I would have spent more time understanding media buying at the beginning of my career, even though the media landscape, I'm old enough that at the beginning of my career, there was mass market. Obviously, that no longer exists. I've kind of been at the tail end of the mass market and a little too old to be considered digitally native, though my phone never leaves my hand. Rarely, it's sitting right here now, but it's not in my hand. And so I've been a bit of a tweener. And if you could give, your younger self advice in this context, the proverbial advice, it's be more curious and actually do something about your curiosities. Like, I've been curious and not done anything, which is pretty much a waste of energy and time.
When you think about higher education and a lot of schools offering the same thing, you work in markets, you've worked with CMOs that are in very competitive landscapes. What would you have in our noisy world in terms of suggestions to maybe rise above the noise and be that, we're distinctive?
Well, you have to seek to rise above the noise and be differentiated while not losing sight of value. Because it's easy to be different. If I was sitting here in a chicken suit, I'd be differentiated and distinct, but that wouldn't make me more valuable. Look, I just went through this process a year ago. My daughter is a freshman in college, and there really wasn't much that differentiated one from the next, besides kind of national rankings, reputations, the data about number of applicants, and the percentage accepted. And then, when you get into it, it's really the experiential, right? Experiential marketing has become a big part of it. I certainly would say to every parent, you need to visit every school that your kid is ultimately considering, because that's where you really feel the distinction, the difference, and or the commonality. And I really wanted my daughter to go get a liberal arts education, cognizant that would be less and less kind of traditionally valuable as we move more to a vocational orientation. But I thought it would train her mind in ways that will be useful throughout her life. But I think if I'm a school, I'm really looking at how I am affecting and participating in national discourse, because, today's kids and their parents, we're all kind of looking at the same resources. And so what gets you into the consideration set, and then what gets you out of the consideration set into I want to buy here if I get in here. And I will tell you, there was only one moment in Ella Rose's journey, and she probably applied to 21 schools, that was differentiated. But somebody's outreach to the parents, it wasn't personal and tailored. It was just completely human. It was funny. It was a small liberal arts school. I can't remember which one, though. It was funny. It was human. It was germane. And it made an institution feel like a neighbor. Now, obviously, easier for a small liberal arts school in the Northeast to do that than UCLA, but maybe not actually easier. So never lose sight. Same thing I said before. First rule of comedy, first rule of marketing, know your audience. Never lose sight of what is going to get your audience to buy. But right now, many of the institutions are in, the proverbial catbird seat, which is to say they decide if they want to invite you in and they know what the percentage, looks like.
Yeah. 1 through 10 scale, 1 not at all influential, 10 really influential. How influential do you think you were in your daughter's search?
In her search, I think I was reasonably influential, which is I helped her consider the range and in some cases the specificity of the types of schools she looked at. But this was her decision, and she was fortunate to have a lot of options. And she didn't choose the school I kind of would have voted for her to go to, but I'm not spending the next 4 years there. She is. So, I sought to guide and give her the permission to make what she thought was the best decision for her.
And if you kind of prioritize the factors of where she ultimately decided to enroll, what was maybe 1 or 2 on her list, Seth?
That there's a beach, because as she said to me, she did not get into her first 2 choices, and it's so random. And she's like, if I couldn't get into my first 2 choices, I might as well go where there's a beach. So she went where there's a beach, and I had trouble arguing with that logic.
Yes. And so far, so good. She's happy at her institution.
Seems to be doing all right. Yeah.
What have we not talked about, Seth, that when you think about your experience, again, you have so many strong connections with these marketing leaders. What would be some maybe other thoughts that we haven't touched upon that our listeners today could maybe take a nugget of wisdom of?
I mean, we haven't touched on a zillion and 6 things. I think I'd answer the question with the same way I give advice to new parents, which is by saying, ignore my advice, right? Everybody who's ever been a parent has an opinion on it. It doesn't really fucking matter. Just find your own way. And I think that there are truths about that that are as true for raising humans as building brands and businesses. And it's find your own way, right? I think there's probably never been a time in the history of capitalism, and marketing is an engine of capitalism for good or ill, where one is more able to find their own path. But to find your own path, I think, it does require a little bit of the study of and understanding the history of what came before, so that decisions to break from the norm are rooted in understanding of the norm. The status quo doesn't always serve us, but it sometimes does.
Yeah. One of the posts I saw you made on LinkedIn is about context matters. We keep seeing this, number that the average shelf life of a CMO is 3 years. And I love how you pointed out that some of those CMOs are going on and serving as CEOs and becoming leaders of these organizations. Are you optimistic that the marketing function has grown in its kind of credibility? Are you seeing more CMOs become leaders of organizations? How would you react to that, Seth?
I'm not optimistic by nature. I kind of subscribe to John Updike's definition of cynicism, which is its tired pragmatism. So I think I might describe myself as more hopeful. But I do think that there are certainly trend lines that say, yeah, more and more CMOs, and doesn't have to be a lot to be more and more, unfortunately, but more and more are rising into those ranks. More and more are seeing board seats, if not CEO seats. I would like to see more CMOs who call me up to say that they are starting to consider what's next, not to tell me that they're looking for the next CMO job, but for their first CEO job. And I think that's a matter of ambition as much as anything. But yeah, I think there's a lot of reason to paraphrase Nick Cage in saying, there's reasons to be cheerful.
Yeah. In higher ed, we talk about these silos all the time. And when we go in and do facilitation on campuses, there's just a lot of, let me resort to my own bunker. Do you think CMOs have the opportunity, knowing they touch kind of every aspect of the college or university experience, to be leaders in breaking down these silos?
I can't answer whether they have the opportunity, because that is probably a function of the president of the university and some other things, but they certainly should have the skill set and the obligation to. It's no different in the business world, and colleges are business, whether they're for profit or not, which is, everything is connecting in today's world, but not everything is connected. And that's an organizational imperative, I believe, moving forward. And if you as the leader of an organization, the person, whether you're the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, random, I'm not picking on Jamie, I'm not actually that fluent in how he's organized the company. But if you're the CEO of an enterprise in name and title only or functionally, it's your obligation to make certain that the enterprise is functioning as cohesively and holistically and connectedly as possible. I don't care what you're selling. I don't care where you are. Integration is better than disintegration almost every time.
Last question. True or false? You had an opportunity to collaborate with LeBron James when he was in high school.
Neither true nor false. The story is I was at Creative Artists Agency, CAA, and, big agency in Hollywood, the biggest, and in my opinion, the best. And we were representing the Coca-Cola company across their portfolio of brands. LeBron was coming out of high school into the NBA, and Sprite, one of the company's brands, was deep in negotiation into doing a deal with LeBron. And I told them not to. I was like, yeah, don't. What are the odds this kid succeeds? Sprite did not listen to me. Turns out the kid succeeded. I think he'll cross 50,000 points this evening, in fact. And one of a very, 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 very long list, if not always as good a story of things I got wrong along the way.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to share with our viewers as I let you go? You've provided some really helpful insights, and I think far too often we're insulated, Seth, in higher education. We need some of these voices that can kind of speak in and recognize academia is different, but there's things that are transferable as well. Any other thoughts in closing?
I think that the academic world, in particular colleges and universities, have an extraordinary opportunity, one by one, to differentiate themselves. The marketing, I don't even know what the marketing is, quite frankly, right? The football teams tend to be the best marketing, the basketball teams, and I don't say that flippantly. They're real brand builders, and I'm sure you can correlate some increase in applications as teams that don't historically do as well as Duke might, with an increase in same. And so marketing can be the game changer. And I think it's also imperative, and this is true if you're selling a UC college or a state university, is if you're selling Rolls Royces, don't get so caught up in what you know about what you do and where you are and what you make, that you lose sight of what somebody else is buying. I think the last story I'll share is I was sitting on the beach early in my career. It was like maybe the first or second summer of my career, and I was on vacation. I was sitting on the beach in the Hamptons, and I was reading a local Hamptons newspaper called Dan's Papers. I believe it still exists. And there was an ad from a realtor that said, rather than show you a picture of the house we want to sell, we thought we'd ask you about the house you want to buy. And that's got to be pretty close to 35 years ago now. I've never forgotten it, because it's really the fundamental lesson that we as marketers, sellers, and I use marketing and sales interchangeably, need to keep in mind.
I love that. I had great and high expectations for this time together, and you delivered on it. I'm really grateful, and thank you so much.
For sure.
The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.